Hello my friends, it's Roger once again, Mud Fossil University, on the hunt to explain the unexplainable, and we will shortly explain what you are about to see right now, which you may say, Roger, that's impossible, that's trick, that can't be. And I say, oh no, that can be, and I will tell you exactly why it can be, and what is happening, and what the interaction is. Alright, this video is by Nighthawken Light, and it displays exactly the interaction between copper and magnets, and which is the electron clouds that surround things. And I'm going to explain it in great detail very shortly. You have to understand the basic items we're dealing with, which is atoms, electrons, and protons. Alright, these are my claims based on the experiments with light and the regions that the light particles control. Now, I will go along with these statements. Electrons are approximately 834 times smaller than a proton. So every electron is 834 times smaller than a proton. An electron is a -1 charge and a proton is a +1 charge. It's extremely important to understand this. One of them is a massive particle, one of them is a tiny particle. They both have the same charge. That means they both control the same region in space. All right, think about that for a minute. They both have the same charge. So there's the electron right in the center, a little tiny dot, and it's tinier than you'd ever even be able to see. And it controls this region all around there. Nobody's supposed to get in there except it owns that. Now, what happens over here? That's an electron, a region. This is the region, the same region as this, but the mass is 0.00055 atomic mass units. All right, a proton is over 1 atomic mass unit. Look at the difference now. But they own the same space because they are the same charge. So let's take it from there. Now, so we got a gigantic proton, a massive particle in there, owning a tiny little region in space around it. Neutrons do not exist. Forget neutrons. They do not exist. And I will show you why I can say that, and I'm almost 100% sure that is a fact. These electrons will flood these protons, and because the protons don't control much of a region, they will snuggle up to that thing right, and they will lay all over it. And there's 1,830 something of them will coalesce around these neutrons. Around these protons. Neutrons don't exist. Forget neutrons. They will just cuddle right up around there until they exceed the weight of the proton just by a hair. And that keeps all the incoming electrons in orbitals. So the protons in the nucleus are flooded with electrons until they get to a mass that will not allow any more right up next to this mass of negative positive particles, and then the additional ones come in orbits. We'll go over that a little more detail. But this is what the takeaway is. They both control the same regions. The same regions. These things don't accelerate like these. These are light. These will get thrown off of other matter and accelerated away and spin away. When they do, they excite an enormous region in space, and I will show that. Now, this is where you can find the details. It's called www.citycollegiate.com, atomic structure. All right, now, so you have the atom. Everybody knows what an atom is. It has a nucleus in the center, a ball, and then it has little electrons spinning around in certain orbits, further and further and further out, depending on how big the core is. All right? And they have exact different locations they occupy because they're all negative particles, and they push against each other exactly the same way in every direction, so they end up creating these elegant little patterns. Now, so that's, and then it can be divided up. So how it is divided up? Well, there's electrons, and the electrons circle the nucleus, as they've always said. I can go along with that. And then in their orbitals. Now, the charge of an electron is that 10 to the minus 19 coulombs. the charge on a proton is exactly the same charge, only it's negative, a positive and negative. All right. Now the mass, look at the mass, way, 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 way down in mass, and look at the mass of a proton. It's like a bazillion times bigger. Well, 1837 times more massive than that. All right. So what does that tell you? The charge is the same. The mass is like gigantic. So obviously the mass is filling up a bigger space and the charge occupies a smaller space. The electron fills up a tiny space with mass and has a gigantic charge to it in relation to its size, and it covers the same territory, I believe, as the proton. So they both cover the same space with their charge, but one of them is all filled up with protonness, and the other one has hardly any electronness. Now, forget neutrons, they don't exist. Then it goes down here and it talks about how you read these symbols and what it means. Now, some of them, this is the key. This is the key to magnetism, to electricity, to all of the different electromagnetic interactions you see, how solenoids can do this and that, and how motors work. It is because some atoms do not have the same number of electrons and protons. They have an excessive number of particles in the nucleus that are not protons. I say the nucleus is not neutrons. Everywhere where there's been a neutron, there's 1842 electrons. Right? Because the electrons take up the mass of the neutrons. There's no neutrons. And they snug right up to the protons like marbles inside of a snowball. Think of it that way. The marbles are the protons. They're gigantic. 1.00 gigantic. That's big. They're 1837 times bigger than the protons, which are squishing all around them. And it takes 1837 of them to make the mass that they calculate out that these nuclear cores possess. So this is not pie in the sky that I'm talking about. I'm saying if there was no neutrons, you would fill every neutron space with 1837, whatever it is, electrons. And that would make the same mass. All right, the same weight. So we're not losing anything there. However, we're gaining what we know is the electron escape capability, extremely powerful. But in the core, they're locked solid. They can't get away. You can't break those apart easily. Very, very hard to break them apart. And the only way is when they do that atomic bomb, they crush everything together. Now all the electrons are saying to each other, I'm just getting out of here. And they all go at the same time. And then you end up with a positive core, goes straight up off the Earth. That is an atomic bomb. That is anti-gravity. That's when your core becomes positive and rejects the Earth's positiveness. And the Earth's positiveness draws every single thing in the universe towards it, because every single thing in the universe is coated with electrons. There is nothing that does not contain electrons. Light is electrons, so that's, you're done there. Then you go into anything that's matter that is coated with electrons, because that's every atom has electrons surrounding it. So that's everything in the universe. So the positiveness of all massive bodies, which massive means they have nucleuses, they attract everything that has electrons, and that is everything else. When you have two masses that have both nucleuses and electrons, so they're two complete bodies, they come together in multiple ways. All the positives pull each other negatives from both sides. So there's a little more of an interaction there. The other thing is that all the light particles that are floating around in space, because they are all the electrons thrown off the sun that we receive as light and heat, they're floating around in space as ether particles. They have no interaction in the vacuum of space. They have no nucleuses to bang into.